They laughed at a veteran restoring an old tank, until the general arrived and made them sorry. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get into the story. I will take it from here. The general's presence was undeniable, his four-star insignia gleaming as he surveyed the scene with a mixture of authority and respect. The technicians, who had once scoffed at the old man, now stood frozen, their eyes wide in shock. They had witnessed something remarkable, the restoration of a machine they believed beyond repair. But more than that, they had just learned a lesson they would never forget. Sergeant Major Martin Kelly was not just any veteran. He was a legend, a man whose years of experience were more valuable than all the modern tools at their disposal. The following day, the base was abuzz with talk about Sergeant Major Martin Kelly. The technicians who had once laughed at the old man were now spread across the repair shops, whispering in hushed tones about what they had witnessed. They couldn't believe how one man had restored a tank that even their best equipment couldn't bring to life. The general's words still echoed in their minds, a constant reminder of the lesson they had learned the hard way. Respect for the past, for the veterans who had served before them, was not just a matter of history. It was a matter of life and death, of experience outweighing the latest technology. But for Kelly, none of this mattered. He had done his job, and now, he was back at his humble workbench, quietly tuning up an old engine that had been waiting for his expertise. He worked with the same focus, the same dedication, that he had always brought to his craft. There was no arrogance in his movements, no sense of superiority, just the calm assurance that comes with decades of experience. The days passed quickly as Sergeant Major Martin Kelly settled into his new role, the weight of his responsibility sinking in. The base, once full of skepticism and uncertainty, was beginning to change. Under Kelly's guidance, the younger soldiers and technicians started to look at their work with fresh eyes, no longer relying solely on the latest technology, but also embracing the wisdom of experience. Kelly had set out to teach them more than just the mechanics of machines. He aimed to teach them the value of patience, attention to detail, and most importantly, respect for the past. He had been given a team, and he wasted no time in shaping them into a unit that was as skilled with their hands as they were with the machines they worked on. The weeks that followed the mission in the desert brought a new rhythm to the base. Sergeant Major Martin Kelly had quickly gained the respect of everyone around him. It wasn't just his ability to fix old equipment or restore broken machines. It was his unwavering commitment to teaching those around him, his quiet but firm belief that the best way to honor the past was to ensure the future understood it. Kelly's team, once full of cocky young technicians who believed their gadgets were the solution to everything, now worked with a new sense of purpose. They were learning to appreciate the value of knowledge and experience. They were learning to listen, to understand that sometimes the simplest solutions were the best. It was a subtle shift, but one that Kelly knew would last. One afternoon, Colonel Hayes called Kelly into his office. "Sergeant Major," he said, glancing at the papers on his desk before looking up. "We've got another problem, and I think you're the right man for it." Kelly raised an eyebrow. "What kind of problem, Colonel?" Hayes leaned forward, his face serious. "A few days ago, a convoy was ambushed. Some of the equipment was damaged beyond repair. We've got a critical mission coming up, and we need everything running smoothly. But I don't trust the usual technicians to get it done." Kelly nodded slowly, already understanding where this was going. "You want me to fix it?" "Not just fix it," Hayes said. "We need you to teach the technicians how to do it. It's not just about getting the machines running. It's about ensuring they know how to keep them running, no matter the circumstances. You're the only one who can teach them that." Kelly thought for a moment, his gaze drifting toward the window. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the base. It had been years since he'd been called to handle a situation like this. But the idea of passing on his knowledge, ensuring the next generation of soldiers had the same understanding of machines that he had, that felt like the right kind of challenge. "I'll do it," he said, finally looking back at Hayes. "But I need to be clear on one thing. This isn't about fixing machines. This is about teaching them how to survive with those machines, how to keep going when everything else falls apart. Hayes smiled, his expression softening. I know, Sergeant Major. That's why I need you for the job. The next day, Kelly gathered his team. The technicians, a mix of eager young soldiers and more experienced hands, stood in front of him, waiting for instructions. Kelly surveyed them, his eyes scanning the group. He could see the nervousness in some of their faces. They had all heard the rumors about the old veteran who could fix anything, but they didn't fully understand what made him different. We've got work to do, Kelly said, his voice steady. This is no ordinary job. We're not just going to fix equipment. We're going to teach you how to think like soldiers, not just technicians. This mission is critical, and I need you to be ready for anything. The team listened in rapt attention, some of them nodding as if they were already absorbing the lesson. Kelly pointed to the row of damaged equipment, tanks, jeeps, and communication systems. Each of these machines represents more than just metal and gears. They represent lives, missions, and the difference between success and failure. If we don't get this right, it could cost us everything. The technicians got to work, and Kelly led the way. He moved from one machine to the next, explaining what needed to be done, but always emphasizing the principles behind the work. It wasn't just about fixing the current problem. It was about preparing for the next one, understanding how each machine fit into the larger picture of military operations. As the hours passed, Kelly worked tirelessly, never rushing, always teaching, always reminding his team that their job was more than just technical expertise. It was about survival, about being ready for anything. By the end of the day, the machines were all functioning again, but the real victory wasn't in the equipment. It was in the way the technicians had worked together, their confidence growing with each repair, each lesson learned. As Kelly watched them pack up, he felt a sense of pride. This wasn't just another repair job. It was a chance to ensure that the legacy of the veterans who had come before him would live on, not just in stories, but in the skills and knowledge of the soldiers who would carry it forward. That evening, as he sat alone in his quarters, Kelly allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The work had never been easy, but it had always been meaningful. And as he thought about the young technicians who had started to see the value of experience, he knew that his time wasn't wasted. The next generation was ready, and he had done his part to ensure they would never forget the lessons of the past. The sun was beginning to set as Sergeant Major Martin Kelly stood alone in the training field, watching the soldiers practice their maneuvers. The air was thick with dust, the light fading as shadows grew longer. It had been weeks since that critical mission in the desert, and since then, things had changed at the base. The technicians who had once looked at Kelly with skepticism now came to him with questions, eager to learn. The lessons he had imparted were beginning to take root, and his reputation had spread beyond just his team. He had become a symbol of what it meant to respect the past and the wisdom it carried. Kelly had made his mark, but there was still more work to be done. As he watched the soldiers, he felt the weight of his responsibility. He had taught them the basics, the technical skills they needed to repair and maintain the equipment, but he knew that there was more to being a soldier than just knowing how to fix machines. It was about understanding the bigger picture, the strategy, the mission, and the sacrifices that came with it. That night, after the training session had ended, Colonel Hayes called Kelly into his office. Sergeant Major, I need you for something. Kelly followed Hayes into the dimly lit room, where a few senior officers were waiting. One of them, a lieutenant, Colonel Kelly didn't recognize, stood by a large map laid out on the table. Hayes gestured to the map. We've got a mission coming up, and it's going to require all hands on deck. This isn't like the others. It's a covert operation, and we need someone who knows how to handle old-school tactics. Kelly's eyes narrowed as he studied the map. The area marked for the mission was a rough, unforgiving terrain. It wasn't the kind of place where modern technology alone would make the difference. You're the man we need, Sergeant Major, Hayes continued. This mission isn't just about getting in and out. We need someone who knows how to read the land, who understands how to make do with what we have. The equipment we'll be using is older, but it's still effective if you know how to use it. Kelly listened carefully, his mind already shifting into mission mode. He had been in situations like this before, times when technology was unreliable or unavailable, when the success of a mission depended on resourcefulness and skill. When do we move out? Kelly asked, his voice steady. Tomorrow morning, Hayes replied. We'll need to move quickly and quietly. The element of surprise is key. Kelly nodded. He had worked with these kinds of conditions before, and he knew what it took. The next morning, the team assembled at the base, ready for the operation. The convoy was smaller than usual, just a handful of vehicles loaded with the necessary equipment, including the older machinery Kelly had been tasked with maintaining. As they moved out, the team was silent, each person lost in their own thoughts, the seriousness of the mission hanging in the air. Kelly rode in the lead vehicle, his eyes scanning the landscape. His mind was sharp, focused on what lay ahead. The terrain was rugged, a mix of rocky hills and dense brush, a far cry from the controlled environments they were used to. It was the kind of place where the right kind of experience would make all the difference. As they neared the target area, Kelly's instincts kicked in. He had been here before, in places just like this. He knew how to move quietly, how to use the environment to their advantage. The team set up camp for the night, and Kelly went to work, checking the equipment and making sure everything was ready. He knew the importance of the next phase. It wasn't just about getting the machines running. It was about making sure they could be used effectively in the field. As the hours passed, the team fell into a quiet rhythm, the noise of the outside world muted by the thick trees surrounding them. Kelly, as always, was the calm in the storm, moving from one task to the next with methodical precision. As dawn approached, the team prepared for the final push. Kelly gave the orders, making sure each soldier knew their role. They were ready. The mission was dangerous, and the odds were against them, but Kelly was confident. They had the skills. They had the experience. And now, with the older equipment functioning flawlessly, they had the tools to succeed. As they moved out, Kelly led the way, his eyes scanning every detail. The team followed, trusting in the knowledge he had passed on, knowing that they were prepared for whatever came next. The mission was a success. They had completed the objective, and as they made their way back to base, Kelly couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. It wasn't just about the machines or the mission, it was about the people. The soldiers had learned from the best, and they were better for it. They had proven that even in a world dominated by new technology, there was still value in experience, in the lessons of the past. And for Kelly, that was the greatest victory of all. As the weeks passed, Sergeant Major Martin Kelly's reputation continued to grow. He had completed his mission with the same precision and calmness that had always defined his work. But it wasn't just the technical prowess that people admired. It was the way he inspired those around him to rise above their limits. The younger soldiers, once skeptical of his old-fashioned ways, now sought his advice. They watched as he worked, absorbing the lessons he imparted without even realizing it. Kelly didn't just fix machines. He rebuilt the confidence of a generation of soldiers who had forgotten what it meant to be truly skilled. But despite the success, Kelly knew that there was always more to do. A new challenge loomed, one that would test everything he had taught and everything he had yet to pass on. One morning, as the sun rose over the base, Colonel Hayes approached Kelly. "Once more? Sergeant Major, I need to talk to you," Hayes said, his face serious as always. Kelly wiped his hands on his coveralls, setting aside the tools he had been using. He had been preparing the equipment for a new round of training, but it seemed that another mission was on the horizon. "What's going on, Colonel?" Kelly asked. Hayes motioned for him to follow as he led the way to his office. The two men entered the small room, where several officers were already waiting. Kelly took a seat, his eyes scanning the map spread out before him. It was an unfamiliar location, far from the base and deep into hostile territory. Hayes didn't waste any time. "We've got a situation," he began, his voice low. "There's a compound in the mountains we need to take control of. It's heavily fortified, and the usual approach is too risky. We're going in with a small team and minimal support. This is where your experience comes in." Kelly's mind immediately began working through the details. He had been on enough missions to know that this would be a tough one, the kind of operation where mistakes meant lives. "What do you need from me?" Kelly asked. Hayes looked at him with a mix of respect and urgency. "We need you to lead a team of engineers and soldiers to disable the security systems. Once that's done, the main force will move in. But we can't afford to fail. If the equipment doesn't work, we'll be sitting ducks." Kelly nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. He had spent his career dealing with high-stakes operations, and he knew that this would require everything he had taught his team. "I'll do it," he said, standing up and gathering his gear. "But we do it my way. We'll move in, get the job done, and get out. No unnecessary risks." The colonel gave him a tight nod. I trust you, Sergeant Major. Let's get this done. The mission began early the next morning, with Kelly leading a small team of soldiers and engineers through rugged terrain toward the compound. The air was thin in the mountains, and the climb was exhausting, but Kelly was as steady as ever. His team followed closely, trusting him implicitly. As they neared the compound, Kelly called for a halt. He surveyed the area, his eyes scanning the landscape, looking for any weaknesses or signs of movement. We move in at dusk, he said quietly. We need to take out the perimeter defenses first. Once that's done, we can disable the communication systems. The soldiers nodded, knowing that Kelly's plan would leave nothing to chance. As the sun set behind the mountains, the team moved out under the cover of darkness. Kelly's team was silent, moving with the practiced efficiency that had become second nature to them. They reached the outer wall of the compound, where Kelly immediately began examining the security systems. It's an old system, he muttered to himself, his fingers tracing the wiring. But it's been updated. If we're not careful, we'll set off alarms. The engineers worked quickly, following Kelly's instructions to the letter. They disabled the first set of cameras and sensors, moving carefully to avoid detection. Kelly's mind was sharp, his experience guiding every move. They worked in sync, each member of the team understanding their role without needing to speak. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the perimeter was clear. The main force was ready to move in. But just as Kelly gave the signal to advance, the ground shook beneath them. A deafening explosion rang out, followed by the crackle of automatic gunfire. The team froze for a split second, realizing that their position had been compromised. We've got company, Kelly said, his voice calm. Get to cover now. The soldiers scrambled to safety, their guns raised as they took defensive positions. Kelly crouched low, his eyes scanning the area for the source of the attack. It wasn't supposed to be like this. They had been careful, methodical, but something had gone wrong. Kelly's training kicked in as he surveyed the situation. Hold your ground, he ordered. We're not retreating. Stay focused. His voice was unwavering, the same calm authority he had shown when leading his team through difficult repairs. The battle raged on, the sound of gunfire and explosions filling the air. Kelly's team held their ground, their resolve unshaken. They knew that this was the moment where their training would be tested. And as the battle continued, Kelly's thoughts raced. He had trained them well, but now, they would need to rely on everything they had learned from him, everything they had absorbed over the past few weeks. Finally, after what felt like hours, the enemy forces began to retreat. The compound was secure. The mission had been a success, but at a cost. Kelly looked around at his team, their faces grim but resolute. They had made it through together. And as the dust began to settle, Kelly knew that this mission had proven more than just their technical skills. It had proven their ability to adapt, to think on their feet, and to rise to the occasion when everything was on the line. It wasn't just about fixing equipment or following orders. It was about being a soldier, about knowing what it took to survive and succeed in the toughest of circumstances. After the battle, the base was quiet. The dust had settled, and Sergeant Major Martin Kelly stood in front of his team, looking out over the horizon as the sun began to set. The mission had been a success, but the cost had been high. Several soldiers were injured, and the compound was left in disarray. Yet despite the chaos, there was a sense of accomplishment in the air. Kelly had led them through it all, not just with his experience, but with the quiet leadership that had earned him the respect of everyone around him. The young soldiers who had once doubted him now looked at him with a different kind of respect, one that came from seeing him lead them through the fire. They had witnessed firsthand the value of his expertise and the strength of his resolve. But Kelly didn't feel the sense of victory that others did. The weight of the loss was heavy on his shoulders, and the mission wasn't over yet. There was still work to be done, still lessons to be learned. As they returned to base, the technicians and soldiers began to repair the damaged equipment, getting everything back to working order. Kelly watched them for a moment, his thoughts far away. He knew that they had learned something valuable, that it wasn't just about technology, about gadgets and machines. It was about the people, the ones who had the experience, the ones who knew how to adapt in the toughest of situations. As he walked back to his quarters that night, the events of the day played over in his mind. It wasn't the battle that weighed on him. It was the faces of the soldiers he had lost, the ones who hadn't made it. He thought about The lessons they had taught him, the sacrifices they had made. They were the reason he kept going, the reason he kept teaching. He had lived through so much, but he knew that the real work was in the lessons he passed on. The soldiers who survived needed to carry those lessons forward. That was his duty now, to ensure that the next generation of soldiers understood the true meaning of sacrifice, the true value of experience. The next morning, as Kelly prepared for another round of training, Colonel Hayes approached him again. "Sergeant Major, I need you for something else," Hayes said, his tone as serious as always. Kelly turned to face him, wiping the sweat from his brow. "What's going on, Colonel?" Hayes handed him a folder, one marked with the familiar red, urgent stamp. "We've received word of a new operation. It's critical, and it's going to require everything we've got. We need you to lead a team to secure a communication outpost in the mountains. But this time, it's going to be different. We can't afford any mistakes." Kelly looked at the folder, then back at Hayes. "When do we leave?" he asked, his voice steady. "First light," Hayes replied. "We need to move fast. You'll have a smaller team this time, but we trust you to get the job done." Kelly nodded. The mission wasn't like the others. This time, they were going into unknown territory, without the backup they were used to. But Kelly had faced worse. "We'll get it done," he said, a fire in his eyes. That evening, as the team prepared for their departure, Kelly sat down with each of them, making sure they understood the importance of the mission. He reminded them that it wasn't just about getting the equipment up and running. It was about securing the future, ensuring that the communication lines were open and that the mission would succeed. The next morning, as the convoy made its way toward the mountains, Kelly felt the familiar calmness wash over him. He had done this countless times before, but something was different now. He wasn't just leading soldiers into battle. He was leading them toward a future. He was teaching them the value of experience, of being prepared for anything, of knowing that no matter how advanced the technology, there was always a human element that made the difference. The journey was long, and the mountains loomed ahead, dark and unforgiving. The air grew thinner as they ascended, but Kelly never faltered. His team followed his lead, their confidence in him unwavering. They reached the outpost just before nightfall, and Kelly immediately began assessing the situation. There were no signs of enemy activity, but he knew better than to assume the area was secure. "We set up camp here," he ordered, his voice calm and clear. "We move at dawn. Stay alert, and keep your heads on a swivel. We don't know what we're walking into." The team worked quickly, setting up camp and securing the perimeter. Kelly moved from one soldier to the next, making sure they understood their roles and responsibilities. As the night settled in, Kelly sat outside the campfire, staring out into the darkness. The silence was heavy, the weight of the mission pressing down on him. He knew that there was still a lot to teach, still much more to pass on. But this was what he had trained for, what he had spent his life preparing for. And as he watched the stars overhead, Kelly knew that he would continue to lead, continue to teach, and continue to protect the next generation of soldiers, no matter what came next. The first light of dawn broke over the mountains as Sergeant Major Martin Kelly and his team prepared for the next phase of their mission. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bit into your skin but didn't quite freeze you. Yet, the mission ahead was still uncertain, and Kelly knew better than to let his guard down. The quiet of the morning was only broken by the soft rustle of equipment being packed and the low murmur of his team as they got ready. They had reached the outpost the night before, and despite the lack of enemy presence, Kelly could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on him. This wasn't just another operation. The stakes were higher this time, and he wasn't sure what they were walking into. He had been in situations like this before, where everything seemed calm until it wasn't. But now, with a team he had trained and led through thick and thin, he felt an added responsibility. It wasn't just about getting the job done. It was about ensuring his soldiers came back safely. As the sun climbed higher, Kelly gathered his team in a tight circle. The mission was simple on paper. Infiltrate the compound, secure the communication systems, and disable the enemy's ability to track their movements. But Kelly knew that nothing ever went according to plan in the field. "Stay sharp," Kelly said, his voice low but firm. "We don't know what we're going to find once we're inside. Stick to the plan, but be ready to improvise." The soldiers nodded, their faces a mixture of determination and apprehension. They trusted Kelly completely, but they knew that the real test was coming. With the signal to move out, the team crossed the treacherous terrain, carefully moving toward the compound. Kelly led the way, his eyes scanning every shadow, every corner. The mountainside was rugged, the earth uneven beneath their boots, but the team moved as one, accustomed to working in difficult conditions. Kelly's heart rate remained steady, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. He had learned over the years to trust his instincts, and his gut told him they weren't alone. As they reached the outer perimeter of the compound, Kelly motioned for them to stop. He knelt down, inspecting the ground for any signs of disturbance. The silence of the area felt oppressive. Kelly's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the surroundings. "Something's off," he murmured to himself. The rest of the team crouched low, waiting for his signal. Suddenly, a sharp crack echoed through the air. It was the unmistakable sound of a branch snapping underfoot, but it was too late. Before anyone could react, the sound of gunfire erupted from all directions. Kelly's soldiers immediately dropped into cover, returning fire, but the sheer volume of the attack was overwhelming. It was a full ambush. Kelly's mind raced. He had expected resistance, but not this. They had walked right into a trap. The ambushers had been waiting for them. "Keep your heads down," Kelly shouted, moving swiftly between his soldiers, guiding them into better cover. The enemy had them pinned down, their positions too well placed for a direct assault. Kelly knew they needed to think fast, or they wouldn't make it out alive. "Flank left," he ordered, signaling to the team to move around the compound. "I'll cover you." The soldiers began to shift positions, moving quietly but quickly as Kelly provided cover fire. His training kicked in, his body moving without thinking, his eyes constantly scanning for any sign of movement. It was chaos, but in the midst of it, Kelly remained focused. Every movement counted. Every decision was crucial. As the team moved into position, Kelly spotted a group of enemy soldiers taking aim at his team from the left. With a quick motion, he threw himself into the open, drawing their attention. The enemy soldiers hesitated for just a moment, long enough for Kelly's team to get the upper hand. They opened fire, taking out the enemies on the left and pushing them back. But Kelly didn't have time to celebrate. He knew this was only the beginning. The ambush had been well coordinated, and there was no telling how many more enemies were hidden within the compound. They had to move quickly. "Push forward," Kelly shouted. "We can't stay here." With his team close behind, Kelly led the charge, rushing into the compound. They cleared the first few rooms, quickly dispatching any enemies they encountered, but Kelly was always a step ahead, his mind racing as he thought several moves ahead. Finally, they reached the control room, where the communication systems were housed. Kelly's team quickly set to work, disabling the systems and ensuring the enemy could no longer track their movements. But as they were finishing up, Kelly's gut told him that something wasn't right. He looked up just as a figure emerged from the shadows, a tall man with a military insignia Kelly didn't recognize. "You're too late," the man said coldly, his voice low and dangerous. Kelly's instincts flared. He knew this wasn't just any soldier. This was someone important, someone who had been pulling the strings behind the ambush. "Who are you?" Kelly demanded, his hand on his weapon. The man smiled, a thin, predatory grin. "Someone who's been waiting for you." Before Kelly could react, the man reached for a device on his belt, pressing a button that sent a shockwave through the room. The lights flickered, and the ground beneath their feet shook. Kelly's team braced themselves as the floor beneath them gave way, dropping them into the darkness below. As the dust settled and Kelly pushed himself up, he realized they were no longer in control. They had been trapped. And now, the real battle was about to begin. The dust settled in the darkened room, and for a brief moment, Sergeant Major Martin Kelly thought it was over. The floor had given way beneath them, and the team had fallen into a trap. They landed hard on the cold concrete below, disoriented and shaken, but none of them were seriously injured. Kelly pushed himself up from the rubble, his mind already shifting into gear. This wasn't just another ambush. This was deliberate, calculated. Whoever had set this trap knew exactly what they were doing. "Is everyone okay?" Kelly's voice was steady, but his mind was racing. The soldiers groaned, but they were all conscious and alert, ready to follow his lead. The room was dark, the faintest light coming from the emergency lights embedded in the ceiling, casting long shadows against the walls. Kelly scanned the area, searching for any sign of movement. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice calm but commanding. Stay together. Stay sharp. The team gathered themselves quickly, checking their weapons and equipment. Kelly moved to the far wall, pressing his ear to it, listening for any sound that might give them a clue about their surroundings. He could hear nothing but the soft hum of the ventilation system and the occasional creak of the building settling. The silence was unnerving. "We've got to move fast," Kelly said, turning back to the team. "There's no telling how long we have before they realize we're still alive and come looking for us." As they moved toward the far door, Kelly took the lead, his instincts guiding him. The team followed, staying close to the walls, moving quietly, almost as if they were part of the shadows themselves. Every step was measured, every breath taken with care. They reached the door, and Kelly tested the handle. It was locked. He cursed under his breath, but his mind was already working, calculating their next move. He gestured for one of the engineers to step forward. "Get this open," Kelly ordered. The engineer moved quickly, pulling out a set of tools and getting to work on the lock. Kelly stood guard, his eyes scanning the area. He knew they had only moments before the enemy realized they were still alive. A few tense minutes later, the door clicked open, and Kelly motioned for the team to move through. They entered a narrow hallway, the walls covered in grime, the flickering lights above casting an eerie glow. Kelly moved forward cautiously, his footsteps echoing off the concrete floor. The team followed closely, their eyes darting from side to side, watching for any sign of movement. The hallway seemed endless, twisting and turning, with doors lining the walls. Kelly knew they had to be close to the heart of the compound by now. "We're almost there," Kelly whispered. "Stay tight, stay quiet. We don't want to draw any more attention than we already have." As they reached a corner, Kelly motioned for the team to stop. He pressed his back against the wall, peeking around the corner. Ahead of them was a large door, reinforced with metal bars. Kelly's eyes narrowed. This was it. The communication room, where they could disable the enemy's ability to track their movements. He moved silently toward the door, his hand on his weapon, ready for anything. The rest of the team followed, but just as Kelly was about to reach the door, a sound echoed through the hallway. Footsteps. A group of soldiers was coming toward them. Kelly's heart raced. They had to act fast. Without hesitation, he turned to the team. "Cover me," he whispered. "I'll take the lead. Get to the door." Kelly moved swiftly, his feet barely making a sound on the floor. The soldiers ahead of them were getting closer, but he had no choice. He had to take the initiative. As the enemy soldiers rounded the corner, Kelly sprang into action. He moved like a shadow, darting forward, taking out two of the soldiers with swift, precise shots. The rest of the team followed, opening fire and taking down the remaining enemies before they could react. The silence that followed was deafening. Kelly stood for a moment, scanning the hallway. The team had done their job, but the danger wasn't over yet. He motioned for them to move forward. "Get to the door," Kelly said, his voice firm. The engineer quickly got to work, and in just a few moments, the door was open. Inside, the room was filled with servers and communication equipment, the heart of the compound's operations. Kelly moved in first, checking for any enemies. The room was empty, the hum of machinery filling the silence. "Start disabling the systems," Kelly ordered. The team moved quickly, their hands steady as they disconnected the wires and shut down the communication networks. Kelly kept watch, his senses alert, knowing that the next wave of enemies could be on their way at any moment. As the systems powered down, Kelly let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They had done it. They had completed their mission. The compound was now blind, unable to track their movements. Kelly turned to the team. "Good work, everyone," he said, his voice low but filled with pride. "We've done what we came here to do. Now let's get out of here." As they made their way back through the compound, Kelly felt a quiet satisfaction. The mission had been dangerous, and they had been pushed to their limits, but they had succeeded. They had done what they were trained to do. And as they made their way back to the extraction point, Kelly knew that this would be another lesson for the team, one they would carry with them for the rest of their careers. No mission was ever easy, but with the right skills, the right experience, and the right leadership, anything was possible. As Sergeant Major Martin Kelly and his team made their way back through the compound, their mission complete, there was no time to celebrate. The adrenaline of the fight still lingered in the air, and their focus remained sharp, each soldier staying alert for any signs of enemy movement. The extraction point was within reach, But Kelly knew better than to assume they were safe just yet. The enemy would have realized by now that their communication systems had been disabled, and they'd likely be mobilizing to stop them. Kelly led the team with purpose, his mind already calculating the next steps. He didn't like surprises, and he wasn't about to let this mission end in failure. They had a job to do, and nothing would stop them from completing it. As they moved through the darkened hallways, Kelly's thoughts briefly drifted to the soldiers he had trained over the last few months. They were no longer the hesitant group they once were. They had fought through the chaos and emerged victorious. They had learned the value of experience, of knowing when to trust their instincts, and of relying on each other when the situation seemed impossible. But Kelly knew they weren't out of danger yet. They still had to make it to the extraction point, and that wasn't guaranteed. As they reached the exterior of the compound, Kelly signaled for the team to stop. The area was quiet, too quiet. He motioned for the soldiers to spread out, taking up defensive positions. They had crossed into a small, open courtyard, the walls of the compound looming around them. Kelly's instincts were on high alert. He could feel the tension in the air, like a storm about to break. The enemy could be waiting just beyond the walls, or they could be waiting for them to make a move. He didn't know, but he wasn't about to take any chances. "Stay low," Kelly whispered to his team. "We'll wait here for a few minutes, then move when it's clear." They all nodded, understanding that this was a critical moment. The soldiers settled into their positions, staying out of sight as much as possible. Kelly's eyes scanned the area, his senses heightened. He could hear the distant sound of gunfire, the muffled thrum of helicopters in the sky. It was impossible to tell where the action was coming from, but he knew they couldn't afford to be caught off guard. After what felt like an eternity, Kelly gave the signal to move. "Now," he said, his voice firm and calm. The team moved quickly and quietly, sticking to the shadows as they advanced toward the extraction point. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. Kelly kept his head on a swivel, constantly scanning for any sign of movement. As they reached the edge of the compound, the sound of footsteps echoed behind them. They weren't alone. "Get down," Kelly barked. His team dropped to the ground, taking cover behind a small wall. Kelly peered around the corner, spotting a group of enemy soldiers heading their way. They had been spotted. "We've got company," Kelly said, his voice steady. "We're going to need a diversion." One of the engineers, a young soldier named Jackson, nodded. "I've got something." He pulled a small device from his belt, a makeshift grenade designed to create a loud noise and draw attention. Kelly gave him the go-ahead, and Jackson quickly set the device in place. The sound was deafening as the device went off, sending a massive explosion of sound into the night. The enemy soldiers turned, their attention focused on the noise. Kelly's team moved quickly, using the distraction to slip past the enemies and reach the extraction point. The helicopter was waiting, its blades cutting through the air as it hovered just above the ground. Kelly's heart raced as the team sprinted toward the waiting helicopter. They weren't out of the woods yet, but they were close. As they boarded the helicopter, Kelly took one last look at the compound they had just cleared. The mission was over, and they had succeeded. The team had completed the objective, and they had done it with precision and determination. As the helicopter lifted off, Kelly allowed himself a small sigh of relief. He had led them through the chaos, and they had made it out together. It wasn't just about completing the mission, it was about ensuring that they all came back alive. And in that moment, as the helicopter flew away from the compound, Kelly knew he had done his job. The mission had been a success, and his team had proven their worth. They had learned the hard lessons, the ones that only experience could teach. And they had emerged stronger, more capable, and more confident than ever before. Kelly looked around at his team, each soldier exhausted but proud. They had done what they were trained to do, and they had done it well. As the helicopter soared into the sky, Kelly couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This mission, like so many before it, had been a test of their skills, their courage, and their ability to work together as a unit. And they had passed with flying colors. As the helicopter sped through the sky, Sergeant Major Martin Kelly glanced out the window, watching the mountains they had just left behind slowly fade into the distance. The mission had been a success, but Kelly knew there was no time to rest on their laurels. The mission had tested their skills, their resolve, and their ability to adapt under pressure. Now, as they flew back to base, Kelly couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. They had been through a lot, but there was always more to learn, always more to teach. Kelly's team had come a long way, but it wasn't just about the equipment, the strategies, or the tactics. It was about leadership, and he had worked hard to make sure his soldiers understood that. Leadership wasn't just about giving orders. It was about showing your team what they were capable of, helping them understand their value, and teaching them the lessons that would stay with them long after the mission was over. Kelly's thoughts were interrupted as the helicopter banked sharply, signaling their approach to the base. As they touched down, Kelly saw the familiar sight of the landing zone coming into view. The ground crew quickly moved to secure the helicopter, and the team began to disembark, their fatigues still covered in dust from the previous night's battle. Kelly stood tall, scanning his soldiers as they moved to the briefing area. They had made it through another mission, but the fight wasn't over yet. They had learned valuable lessons, but there was always more to learn. The team entered the briefing room, and Kelly noticed Colonel Hayes waiting for them at the front. The colonel's expression was unreadable, but Kelly knew that whatever came next, it would be important. Sergeant Major, Hayes began, addressing Kelly as the rest of the team took their seats. I know it's been a long night, but there's something we need to discuss. Kelly nodded, giving a silent acknowledgement. The colonel looked at the team, his eyes narrowing with a hint of pride. What you did out there, in those mountains, was nothing short of incredible. You worked together, you adapted, and you achieved your mission. But we've got a new challenge ahead. Kelly felt a twinge of curiosity. What kind of challenge, sir? Hayes smiled slightly, a knowing look in his eyes. It's not going to be easy. In fact, it's going to be one of the hardest missions you've faced. We've got another operation coming up. This time, it's deeper into hostile territory. It's a high-risk mission, and we need a team that can work under pressure with minimal resources. We need to be able to move fast and silently, without leaving any trace of our presence. Kelly's mind immediately started processing the details. He had been in situations like this before, where the odds were stacked against them, where everything seemed like a fight just to survive. But he had his team, and that made all the difference. I understand, sir, Kelly said, his voice steady. We'll be ready. The colonel nodded, then turned his attention to the rest of the team. This mission is unlike any other. It will push you to your limits, but I have no doubt that you'll rise to the challenge. I've seen what you're capable of. Now it's time to show the rest of the world. Kelly looked at his team, their eyes filled with a mix of determination and fatigue. They had been through a lot, but they were ready for whatever came next. As the briefing concluded, the team went to work preparing for the next phase of the mission. Kelly, as always, stayed focused on the task at hand, but in the back of his mind, he knew that this mission would be a test of everything they had learned. It wasn't just about getting the job done. It was about proving that they had the strength, the skills, and the leadership to handle anything the enemy threw their way. Hours later, after a final round of preparations, Kelly's team gathered at the helipad. The base was quiet, the calm before the storm. Kelly stood with his team, his eyes scanning the area, his thoughts sharp and clear. He knew that no matter what happened, they would face this challenge together. They would adapt, just as they always had, and they would succeed. As the helicopter touched down, Kelly climbed aboard with the rest of the team, the door closing behind them. They were headed into hostile territory, a place where nothing was guaranteed, but Kelly knew one thing for sure. They would not fail. This was their moment, and they would rise to the occasion. The helicopter lifted off, soaring into the sky, and as the base disappeared below them, Kelly couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. His team had come so far, and he knew that no matter what came next, they would always have each other's backs. They were ready for whatever came next, and with Kelly leading them, there was no doubt in his mind that they would make it through, stronger than ever. The mission had taken them deep into enemy territory, and Sergeant Major Martin Kelly's team was operating on pure instinct. They had faced ambushes, traps, and near-death experiences, but they kept pushing forward. Now, as the operation neared its final stages, the adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by a quiet sense of accomplishment. They had secured the critical objective, disabled the enemy's systems, and now, with a few final tasks remaining, it was time to head home. The helicopter they'd arrived on hovered nearby, waiting to take them back to base. Kelly surveyed his team, their faces weary but determined. They had done it. They had proven to themselves what they were capable of, and Kelly couldn't be prouder. But there was always a sense of unease, an understanding that in this line of work, the job was never truly done. He knew it wasn't just about completing the mission, it was about the legacy they were leaving behind. As they made their way toward the extraction point, Kelly walked alongside his soldiers. The quiet hum of the helicopter's engines filled the air, but the weight of the situation remained. Despite their success, Kelly couldn't shake the feeling that they had entered a new chapter in their journey. There were always new challenges ahead, always more to be learned. The world didn't stop turning just because they had completed their mission. They would have to be ready for whatever came next. As the team boarded the helicopter, Kelly took one last look at the compound in the distance. It was a small victory in the grand scheme of things, but to him, it was everything. He had trained these soldiers, led them through tough situations, and watched them grow into the kind of team he had always hoped they would become. They weren't just technicians or soldiers anymore. They were a unit, one that could face anything and come out on top. As the helicopter lifted off and the compound faded behind them, Kelly turned to his team. "You all did great," he said, his voice steady and calm. "You've proven that you've got what it takes. But remember, it's not just about today. It's about every day after this. Every time we face a new challenge, we'll rise to it. Together." The soldiers nodded, their expressions a mix of exhaustion and pride. They had learned the hard way what it meant to work as a team, what it meant to adapt and improvise when things didn't go as planned. They had followed Kelly's lead, and they had succeeded. The journey wasn't over, but they had come a long way. Kelly sat back, allowing himself a rare moment of relaxation. It wasn't often that he let his guard down, but in the company of these soldiers, he felt a sense of peace. They had faced the impossible and come out on top. There was no doubt in his mind that, no matter what came next, they would rise to the occasion. As the helicopter flew back toward the base, Kelly knew that his job wasn't just about leading missions. It was about passing on the lessons, the skills, and the wisdom that could shape the next generation of soldiers. He had spent years learning from the best, and now it was his turn to teach. This mission had been a test, but it had also been a moment of growth, not just for Kelly, but for his team. They had learned the importance of experience, of leadership, and of working together toward a common goal. And as the helicopter touched down at the base, Kelly felt a sense of closure. The mission was complete. They had succeeded, and they had done it together. It wasn't just about the machines, the tactics, or the equipment. It was about the people, about the bonds forged in the heat of battle. And as Kelly stepped off the helicopter, he knew that he had done his job. His team was ready for whatever came next. In this emotional story, we follow the journey of Sergeant Major Martin Kelly, a seasoned military leader who faces impossible odds while leading his team through intense and challenging missions. As the story unfolds, Kelly's experience and leadership are tested when his team is sent deep into enemy territory to disable enemy systems and ensure the success of a high-stakes operation. Along the way, Kelly teaches his soldiers not only how to fix broken equipment, but also how to rely on their instincts and trust each other under pressure. This emotional story explores the themes of sacrifice, growth, and the power of experience, showing the deep bond that forms between a leader and his team. As they face ambushes, traps, and life-threatening situations, the soldiers learn to adapt and rise to the challenge, proving that no mission is too great when you work together. This emotional story highlights the importance of leadership and the impact it can have on the next generation of soldiers. As the mission nears its end, Kelly and his team reflect on what they have accomplished and the lessons they have learned. Despite the obstacles they face, this emotional story ultimately celebrates the strength of unity, determination, and the unshakable bond that ties them together. With their mission complete, Kelly knows that the journey is far from over, and that there will always be new challenges to face. But for now, the emotional story of this team's success will remain etched in their hearts as a testament to what they've overcome together.